Okay, Hugh, can we move along now and leave the old dock and the harbour as such? Well, not the harbour. Let's just a few steps along, and there's this building called the Lifeboat House. And I think that is very close to your heart. And in particular, a lifeboat that lived there for quite a long time, the Lady Scott. Tell me about it.
Yeah. Well, the Lifeboat House always had a fascination, and we never ventured inside, of course, when I was a child. It was full of lifeboat anyway, and the men who manned the lifeboat, and there were no women then, all men. They were heroes. You heard the exploits of the things that happened. I mean, to this day, I will tell you that I think the lifeboat people are the most, the bravest people in the world.
Okay.
They're ordinary people, and they're doing the most amazing things. And the lifeboat always had that fascination. The lifeboat at that time was the Lady Scott, which came in 1949, I think it was, or 48, round about that time. I don't remember it coming, but I do remember collecting money with a tin as a child and getting a free trip in the lifeboat.
Was this a Flag Day?
A Flag Day, that's
Very
right.
good.
To Port Stuart and back. And of course, the towering figure, really, as far as the lifeboat was concerned, was W.R. Knox.
Okay.
He had been a lifeboat man himself in his early days. He was now the chairman of the council. He was the chairman of the lifeboat committee, and everything to do with the lifeboat. W.R. Knox was a towering figure there. A gruff man, possibly, you might think, but a man with a heart of gold. Good. I could tell many a story about him.
Yeah.
But the lifeboat, I think, as I say, we always had the lifeboat men, the lifeboat in a certain awe. And I can remember as a young journalist in the 1960s, I think it was the occasion when three sailors were lost off a Norwegian destroyer. The lifeboat went out. Fred Williams was the second engineer at the time, and he told me a lot about it. The lifeboat was left to harbour and it disappeared. It just disappeared into the sea.
Yeah.
It was gone. Right. And it emerged further down the West Strand. It was amazing.
Gosh.
And that was a moment when I realised just what those people were doing. It didn't come back after that. It went on. It had actually, I think, gone right over on its side, almost overturned. And the crew were actually thrown right across. The boat was damaged to some extent. One of the crew was hurt, but they went on. And it was hours before they came back. And that I say was an enlightening moment for me.
Okay. Can you name any names of the people on it? I mean, who was the coxswain? Who was the engineer? Well, who were these people?
Yeah, the engineer was Gilbert Chambers. The Chambers family were the engineers. He was the second of the Chambers family. His father, I think it was his father, had been the engineer before, and of course the mantle was carried on right up until fairly recently. I remember the coxswain at that time was, I'd mentioned Bill Strathsey before, and I remember Sam Cunningham. Sam Cunningham had been in the Merchant Navy during the war, and was a very experienced seaman, and he took over as coxswain. He was town clerk of Portrush, and did on occasions have to abandon meetings of the council and rush down to the to the harbour
Well,
for
how did he
the.
know to run down to the council? Because there's no mobile phones and there's no pagers and things like
Yeah.
that. I'm leading you in now to
Yeah, this was the era of the rockets, of course,
Right,
the two
okay.
rockets that went off, that they fired off to summon the lifeboat crew, which was the traditional way of doing it, and had to be abandoned in recent years actually, because when the rockets went off, everybody rushed out to the harbour, and then when the lifeboat men got there, they couldn't get their cars parked, they couldn't get down, they were actually held up. So they actually, I think eventually, John Scott, what he used to do was once the boat was out, he fired the rockets, and then the people could come rushing down.
So other names of other people, other crew members there, can you remember?
Billy Lee was
Well, just a minute, Billy Lee.
Billy Lee, the
See,
photographer.
he wasn't a fisherman, but was he?
He wasn't. No, he wasn't.
Tell me about Billy Lee.
Billy was the local photographer.
Oh, right.
He did work for the Chronicle. He was a lovely man, a very fine photographer, and Billy was the bowman.
Uh-huh.
I remember there was Kenny McMullen,
Yeah.
was another one of the many McMullens,
Yeah.
and Bobby, of course, McNally,
Yeah.
Again another legendary figure.
Absolutely. Yes.
Mike was a lovely person. Nobody knew more about the sea and the harbour and the shipping and the fish and everything and the skerries than McNally.
Yeah.
If you wanted information about it, and I as a journalist many a time went and asked Mike.
Yeah.
Mike knew. He's dead a few years ago now, sadly. He was another one.
Yeah.
And they were all, as I say, just ordinary people. They were fishermen.
Mm-hmm.
They had their jobs, ordinary jobs. They weren't paid for what they did,
No.
but they did it, and they never turned back.
No. Was there a fisherman on the boat too called Jimmy Stewart? Was
Jimmy
he-
Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart. I seem to remember him as a nice man.
He became coxswain, actually.
Did he?
He did. I knew Jimmy very well. He taught my son to swim, actually. And I remember my wife, this is a big jersey for him, for teaching kids to swim. He again was a fisherman. Stuart's another family name. They lived in Moore Street, and again, kindly people.